Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Lisa Kelsey, and I'm pleased to welcome you here today to our webinar on entity-level scenario analysis. With me, I have Jack Bissett, Policy Manager, who will be taking you through the core content. This webinar is in support of the guidance published by the External Reporting Board, which you can find on the Climate Resources page of our website. Today, we'll be running through the key elements, but I highly recommend you go to the website and download a copy. So what are we going to focusing on today? We want to run through the following three main topics. First, what are the specific considerations for non-financial sector entities, including entities listed on the NZX or those issuing listed debt? Second, the big picture of why treating scenario analysis as a valuable exercise is important and how it fits into the journey to transition planning. And third, we'll go through the 6 main steps of scenario analysis, which are detailed in the guidance. All that should take about 30 minutes because we then want to open the floor to questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A box as we go. We'll probably tackle most of them at the end, but we'll try and answer as we go if there are particularly pertinent ones that come up. And now over to you, Jack.
Thanks, Lisa. Kia ora, everybody. So I thought we would start by jumping straight into some specific examples relevant for our corporate climate reporting entities. And so let's jump straight into it. So this is a resource from the Financial Reporting Council in the UK. We've had quite a bit of regard for over the development of the climate standards and guidance on scenario analysis. They basically did a whole bunch of research looking at current practice and trends around scenario analysis in particular. So this was an early source of inspiration for us, and lots of interesting insights in here that we'd encourage you to look at. But one of them is here, which is this difficulty around scenario analysis, which is that the intent of it is a strategy tool. The intent of it is to look at different plausible but challenging climate-related scenarios to ensure that your business is able to navigate those plausible futures. But that actually becomes a little bit of a paradox in the sense of disclosing just how prepared you are at the moment in the current state compared with giving your entity and having entities have the chance to develop responses. So, these are interviews with various companies in the corporate space, and they were reflecting on this. And this is one of the reasons that in the regime, we've actually required less disclosure around the assessment of climate resilience, specifically to ensure that entities are making sure that they do grapple with challenging scenarios that are informed by the latest climate science and economics. And so looking at those ambitious global emissions reduction scenarios, as well as the higher temperature 3 degrees or greater scenarios with more physical climate impacts. And another example is Nestle. So Nestle is a good example that's documented well their journey of scenario analysis, and they've started back in 2019 and have since done some further iterations. So they say that for them, that they take the threat of climate change seriously, requires everybody to act with great urgency, and as a large corporate, they feel that they've got the ability to make a real difference, and they've got ambitious emissions reduction targets in their view. And they note that given that 2/3 of their emissions come from agriculture, that they're working closely with farmers, suppliers and communities, particularly where they operate to source ingredients from in a way that generates positive environmental and social impacts. So I think some New Zealand agricultural customers of Nestle are starting to feel that engagement happen in real life, which is interesting for New Zealand's agriculture sector in particular. So back in 2019, they started their scenario analysis focusing on key commodities of coffee, wheat and dairy, and have since then continued to expand, and that involves engaging with stakeholders. And they see it, in their words, as has been a process to have strategic conversations about the future. Instead of diving straight into action, they can consider where the world might move to, what plausible outcomes and impacts might be, and that helps them to consider the transition to their new economic model, whether orderly or disorderly, as well as how their market competitors and consumers may react. In this document that lays out their reflections, some of the important how is in this first box on the top left. So they've noted that, well, they started by building an internal cross-functional team with broad skills, experience, and perspectives. They've got buy-in from senior level, which was crucial to get the executive support and resources needed. That's something that we're also encouraging in our guidance that we'll talk through today. They've also started off their scenario analysis, in their words, entirely qualitatively, building narratives and having in-depth, valuable discussions focused on their most important parts of their business, noting they've learned a lot about that and climate change in the process. And then sort of as a further iteration, have begun to build in quantification in their approach, and that's also something that we're recommending as well. So some of the other important considerations contextually that are starting to come up, I think globally we'd say that we're seeing rising concern that model heavy and quantitative first approaches to scenario analysis are underestimating climate risk. So this is an important issue to be trying to navigate, and we've got some tips here for how you can hopefully avoid underestimation, which is to avoid confusing models with reality. Following the 6-step scenario analysis method that we're about to lay out, which can help you ensure that impacts that are most material for you are being captured in your analysis, and those are sometimes impacts that models can miss. Try to make sure you understand the difference between scenario analysis and quantitative modeling. Improve your understanding of the assumptions and limitations of some of the existing climate scenarios that you may either draw from or look to. As I said, starting qualitatively and building in quantification is an important ordering. And don't think of scenario analysis as something that's actually done to you by somebody else, but rather something that's done by yourself. And similar to how Nestle was saying, effectively a series of conversations around boardroom tables and with key stakeholders around climate change. So for the corporate sector, there's a range of different sectors that have come together to collaboratively develop sector level scenarios. And so these are available on our website and on various other sector websites that you can draw from. You may have been involved in developing. And so what we'd say about this is that this can help make the job of scenario analysis a little easier. You may have been able to have the opportunity to learn from doing by being involved in that process to see how it plays out. But it is important when using any sector level scenarios that you're using judgment as to whether to use them, how to use them, what to draw from. And they can act as a useful reference point to aid comparability and consistency. But sort of holeless bolus, picking them up and just assuming that they're right for you, it's not the right approach. You need to make sure that they're covering your key risks and opportunities and your key issues, and that may require adaptation from you, or you may decide that you'd prefer to go down the path of developing your own. So that's important to have close regard for. And so here's some of the sectors in the corporate space that have undertaken scenario analysis. We've got the Aotearoa Circle with the kind of looks like a bit of an eye to me, but nice circle. So they've got agriculture, tourism, and marine work covered, and then we've had Green Building Council and the retail sectors come together to develop scenarios as well. And then zooming out a little bit more from that, we've also got other sectors across, particularly finance, so with general insurance, banking, and then the fund manager grouping here, also doing work in this area. And then we're starting to see more and more sectors also do this, so around 14 in total across the regime. So if your sector is either on this list and you're not familiar with it, then please go to our website and have a look or reach out to us. And if you're in a sector that you don't see up here and you think that that's something that should be done or you'd like to be involved with, then we're happy to talk about that further as well as a follow-up.
Jack, just before we move on, we do have one question. I think we should, if we can just answer that now, it'd be good.
Sure.
So recent guidance is steering scenario analysis disclosures to focus on qualitative elements more than quantitative elements, but NZCS require quantitative disclosure from year 2 onwards, in brackets, if adoption provisions are used. Is there a case for relaxing quantitative disclosure requirements given the recent move to a more qualitative approach?
Good question.
So
Well, yeah, yes, I mean, we designed the standard in this way, kind of mirroring this scenario analysis type of method where it's important to generally start on climate risk, getting a sense of what the risks, opportunities, and plausible impacts are before working down. And that takes a bit of time and energy to wrap an entity's head around that. So we're trying to avoid the world where entities are jumping straight to the tried and true Model X or quantitative approach Y to make sure that that doesn't happen, so that then quantification is built in as appropriate. But the disclosures that relate to quantification are related to the current and anticipated impacts and financial impacts, in particular, of climate change. And so, in the regime, there's also a relationship to understand there around scenario analysis where you may use scenario analysis to kind of answer that question for you, but you may also decide to use other tools or methods for how you're going to calculate those.
excellent, Jack. And there is another question we might just quickly do. Do you have any good examples of tech and SaaS scenario analysis?
Technology and software as a service, I guess. If that is asking about in terms of a sector, I don't have any off the top of my head. So if the technology and software as a service sector has come together to do that, there could be examples. I'd be happy to follow up and help have a look globally. I think the WBCSD is particularly an organisation who's led some of this type of work on a global level. But yeah, again, if you are in that sector and think that there'd be value for you in trying to initiate a project like that, very happy to follow up and see what we can do. Because we've been playing that role for these other sectors.
Excellent. Thanks, Jack. And I'm just going to take this one last one. Is anyone looking at state sector analysis in brackets more broadly than CNGP?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that we've been having discussions with policymakers on that. I know people in the Ministry for the Environment in particular are doing their own scenario analysis for various purposes. But, nothing we're aware of in terms of a full-blown government sector writ large. I think that there's work in the adaptation reporting power space around conversations with critical lifeline utilities and critical infrastructure. So yeah, there's conversations going on. I don't think it would be government-wide as a government bubble. I think it'll be chunked out into a few different ones. But it's an interesting question about the role of the government in this area, which will, I think, continue to evolve, particularly if and as reporting requirements also start to move in that direction too.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much, Jack. We'll now continue on. So after getting into the specifics, let's rewind a bit and look at the big picture. This is important because it gives critical context to the rationale of each of the 6 steps of the scenario analysis process. First, where does this guidance fit into climate reporting entities' disclosure requirements? The disclosures that climate reporting entities make under Aotearoa New Zealand climate standards are about explaining an entity's journey to better manage climate-related risks and opportunities. As you may know, we issued all sector staff guidance, which aims to help entities to think about what primary users are looking for from the disclosures themselves. And the Financial Markets Authority has also issued several pieces of guidance relating to their regulation of the reporting. This guidance is different in that it is about the mahi behind the disclosures and to support entities to get the most value from the climate-related scenario analysis process itself. Scenario analysis fits into the strategy section of NZCS, and we encourage entities to keep the purpose statement of the statements in mind, which you can see on the screen there. And a reminder that this guidance is neither mandatory nor binding on entities. It does not have the force of law, nor does it amend or provide any binding interpretation of NZCS. Keeping definitions in mind is fundamental when it comes to applying a standard. Scenario analysis is defined in Aotearoa New Zealand climate standards as a plausible, challenging description of how the future may develop based on a coherent and internally consistent set of assumptions about key driving forces and relationships covering both physical and transition risks in an integrated manner. Lots of these words will come up again when Jack runs through the 6-step process. The definition goes on to say that climate-related scenarios are not intended to be probabilistic or predictive, or to identify the most likely outcome of climate change. They are intended to provide an opportunity for entities to develop their internal capacity to better understand and prepare for the uncertain future impacts of climate change. So again, it's emphasizing that this process is about strategy. It's not about predicting the future. So for the non-financial sector, what does this mean strategically for you? For those listed non-financial sector entities? It can help you answer fundamental strategic questions related to revenue. Where is our revenue going to come from if customers don't want to buy our products or services? If they are considered too emissions heavy? Will people still be able to afford to buy our products and services in a more challenging world? Where are our value add opportunities? Expenditure. Will we be able to bear the cost of debt from the investments we need to make to transition? How much will insurance cost in the future? Will we even be able to insure our assets in the future? Liabilities. How much money will we have to borrow to transition? Who is going to lend it to us? How will we fund our operations if we are considered too emissions heavy or too emissions intensive to finance? We'd also like to highlight this image from the guidance, which is about what scenarios are and are not. Jack will again expand on some of these as part of the 6-step process, but we encourage you to keep these rules of engagement in mind as you go through the process itself. Scenario analysis also fits within a wider context. Entities need to embark on a journey from scenario analysis to transition planning. The disclosures are a way to explain this journey to primary users, but we do not underestimate the nature of this journey in terms of how challenging it is and how potentially transformational it can be. But entities that embrace this whole process will be in a better position to navigate an increasingly uncertain future. We've put out guidance on both sector scenario development, which is a voluntary process and not required by NZCS, and transition planning. We're happy to answer questions in this webinar about any of these steps. And now back to you, Jack, to talk about the guidance itself.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so this section is our pitch to you about why you should go away and actually read this guidance, maybe when it's less sunny or when you've got a bit more time after the session. So let's get into it. So putting this guidance together, we've drawn on very much our Bible, which is the TCFD's recommendations and guidance materials, which have been around since as early as 2017. As Lisa mentioned, we did draw on that to put together our existing guidance on sector level scenario analysis. So in this document, we've effectively started with the TCFD, but we've got specific nods and considerations in here for the situations where you may or may not be looking to draw on higher level sector scenarios that you've got available. So scenario analysis in a nutshell, just very briefly, it's been around for a long time, since the 1950s, being used as a strategy tool, and Shell was the typical example of a corporate doing that back in those kind of times. When done well, it's proves both useful and powerful. I guess that's somewhat of a caveat on the front there, which is that doing it well is tricky, and so that doing it the first time may not necessarily be when you're at the stage where you think that you're doing it well yourself. So it can take a little bit of time to iterate and improve on. It's as much an art as it is a science. There are many pitfalls that we have attempted to help you navigate in this document, and continuing to try to play a role to help everybody work through. And a key aspect of it is that the process is really intended to challenge existing mental models of both your entity, your sector, and then climate change and how that could potentially affect you. So that means that there's a really strong component of this, which is to be confronting some of the cognitive biases that we all generally have, but which particularly for decision makers in corporate entities can be stuck in, which is just part of the context of being in business. And the ultimate point is that, well, if they're not being used for decision making, then they can quickly feel like a waste of time. So there is a kind of challenge here around trying to see the value in this, and then actually putting in enough resources and getting enough leadership around it from the key decision makers and other leaders in your organization, particularly from functions like strategy, to actually have this informed decision making. And that's where we're doing a lot of work at the moment, as Lisa's mentioned, on trying to develop transition planning guidance that really takes these outputs from scenario analysis straight into the process of transition planning as well, intending to actually inform some decisions out the other side. But we hear that a lot is how do we use this in decision making? And that is tricky because it's starting to move into a space of foresight and the idea we've got multiple quite different plausible futures ahead, not just one where we can tend to be in that mindset quite quickly when we're doing shorter term forecasting and analysis. What's the bright side? Well, everybody can do it because it's equally challenging for everyone. It's maybe not our most compelling bright side point. It's scalable. So, it's a generic method. It's been around a long time. It's very much clear in terms of what the steps look like. But, at the end of the day, because it is really a series of discussions from cross-functional teams, ideally with some external viewpoints and expertise, it is about really finding the time to sit around and have discussions about the long term and making sure that you're bringing some of these issues to life in a way that's both engaging for decision makers, but also relevant for you, which takes just a little bit of discussion time to work through. Can also improve the connections both internally and externally. So having discussions with parts of the business and people that you may not ordinarily have any reason to can help break down silos and improve connections with the climate policy, climate science, economics communities as well. And it's also, a good tool for identifying opportunities, helping to make the case for change and inform investments. And, part of that is trying to start with a really robust position on climate risk. So where are the downsides across the economy and beyond, so that you can best, I guess, shine a light on where the opportunities are that come out the back of that. So trying to stay one step ahead of both competitors and the climate. So in this section, I'm just going to do a quick overview of this 6-step process.
Oh, seem to have lost you, Jack. We'll just give hopefully Jack a few minutes. Have we got you back, Jack? Are you back, Jack?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. We lost you for a minute there, Jack.
Okay, apologies. It must be
No
the
worries.
okay, I'll continue. Maybe just go back one slide just in case I dropped out earlier than I hoped. Yeah, so I was just finishing off by saying that this has been written for a variety of people, including those involved in scenario analysis within an entity, and as well as those looking to obtain some external support from a service provider. So those who therefore want to know what the process looks like so that they can get in some support. So here's an outline of the 6-step process. I'll go into detail on each of these steps next. The key thing for this slide is what we've got down the bottom here, which is we've included at each step some further pointers and information around how to improve consistency and comparability, how you can actually document outputs at each stage so that you can basically bring a large group of people through each of the stage gates and keep them engaged and clear about what's been explored and decided at previous stages. And that can inform disclosure later and also help with record keeping. And also conditions for success, capturing good practice considerations. So how to make the most of it from a value and a opportunities perspective. Okay, so step 1, engaging stakeholders. So the key tasks here are to basically get a mandate from the highest governance level and then bring people together. So that should ideally be a good cross-section of people involved with decision making and a good cross-section of the business areas like finance, risk, but also strategy as well as sustainability. And yeah, diversity of perspectives is important. External views can help really add robustness and challenge the thinking in future stages. So this is where the hard work happens really, which is finding the time and resources to do this on top of the BAU that we've all got to keep delivering on as well at the same time. So, so this is a really important stage. The second step involves defining a problem or selecting a focal question, it's also called. And the TCFD basically have a recommended question, which is how could climate change plausibly affect our business model and strategy? What should we do and when? And so we're recommending using this question, at least in early iterations. And the other important parts of the second step is to start defining the scope, making sure you're clear about your entity and how that looks on a page so that everybody can engage with it, and then how your entity engages with the rest of the world. Some of that scope can be important here, and then selecting time horizons as well is important for getting clear on the scope of the analysis. And there's a kind of an emerging challenge there. I mean, I think initially people were looking too short term in the scenario analysis space, and there was a bit of a concern around missing longer term risks that were beyond the 2050s, which is where physical risks in particular become much clearer in those higher warming scenarios. But I think we're in the stage of a bit of a swing back towards shorter time horizons where some of those very long-term time horizons there's a struggle for decision makers to engage with them and actually use them. So there's a considerations in the document to think through there for how to make good decisions about that. Step 3 is where entities identify driving forces and critical uncertainties. So this is where there's a bit of scenario lingo that starts to come in from the scenario textbooks. So it's important to be clear here about what these terms mean, particularly driving forces and critical uncertainties. They can also be easily conflated or confused with what risks and opportunities are. So what we definitely suggest here is make sure you've got a good understanding of the relationship between the words and the terms. Driving forces and critical uncertainties, scenario analysis, and risks in particular, so that you can get the most value out of this process, because this starts to be where the scenario method gets a little more technical. But basically, you're selecting driving forces. So what actually are those? Well, those are external factors that may affect the outcomes of your focal question or problem that you've agreed previously. So what are the key things changing around you? And then critical uncertainties are those driving forces that are the most influential and the most uncertain. So those are the things that could really impact you, and the ones that you're also most uncertain about. So by working through a process of selecting driving forces and then prioritizing them on the basis of how influential and uncertain they are, you begin to get to the position where you're putting these different considerations on axes, which basically pulls out the very most challenging combinations of things that could play out, which creates a scenario for you. So in terms of consistency and comparability, there's a recommendation, and it's common practice in this space to be using physical and transition risk scenario axes wherever you can, but also making sure that that doesn't crowd out your exploration of what are the key impacts and issues for you. Step 4, this is where different temperature outcomes and emissions reduction pathways for how we could get there are explored, and then the implications of those. And so the important thing here is keep in mind what's in the standard itself, which is that there needs to be at least 3 different outcome and pathway combinations.
Jack, we've lost you again. Goodness, the Wi-Fi's not playing ball today. Just give Jack a few minutes. Hopefully he will come back to us.
Which, no, that's not
Jack, you might just have to go back a little bit. We just lost you for a bit again.
Can you hear me right now?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, sorry about that, everybody. Okay, I'll go back a little bit. So I was just saying that the 2 temperature outcomes in the standard that you need to have regard for at this stage are the 1.5 degrees ambitious global emissions reduction transition, and then a 3 degrees or greater temperature outcome, which is where the world fails to ambitiously reduce emissions, and we get a
No, we've lost you again, Jack. Not having too much fun. Okay.
and so
Jack, we lost you again.
is it now, or else I'll just change to my phone.
Do you want to turn
Right,
your
I'll just
camera off,
switch to
maybe?
my...
We've just had a suggestion, which is probably a good suggestion. We know what you look like now, so maybe turn your camera off, and while you're doing that, how about I chuck a couple of questions at you?
Sure.
Okay, so we've just had a question, then we've had a correction to a correction. So if scenarios are to be plausible, why does NZCS require an orderly 1.5 degree scenario, which is an increasingly very unlikely scenario?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think one that's feeling topical at the moment. I guess there is an important distinction in there between what is plausible and what's considered likely or unlikely. And so plausible scenarios can be highly unlikely ones. And even the further we get along the road to 2030, and if we don't see rapid emissions reductions, well, we definitely then clear implication of that is that the cuts will need to be extremely steep to get us there to any sort of temperature outcome like 1.5 degrees. So by exploring that, that ensures that entities can see what the implications of that would be for their business. And then there's the sort of full envelope of risk from the extreme transition risk out to the extreme physical risk on the table for it to grapple with. So if you turn your eyes off to that and make your own mind up about what temperature outcomes could look like out into the 2100s, then you're less well able to manage risk. So it's tempting, I think, for us all individually or in entities to sort of try and rule out temperature outcomes. But if anybody 5 years ago had have told us we'd be where we are now in terms of what we're seeing with the temperature around the globe, I think today's temperature would have been seen as implausible as well. So we need to bring climate science into this process and try to use it to the best we can. But this is also a foresight exercise of exploration, and we need to be careful not to rule things out that are kind of very hard to rule out.
Thank you, Jack. Jack, we've just had a request if we could start from step 4 again. I think it was just because you were cutting in and out. Sorry.
Okay. Happy to do that. Sorry, everybody.
Sorry, everybody. We're having a bit of a mare, but bear with us.
Yes. Okay. Shall I crack into that now, Lisa?
Good on you.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. Yes, I was trying to say here, I was touching on the need to have a strong regard for the standard at this step, which is that you need to have at least 3 temperature outcome and pathway combinations. You need to have a scenario that clearly gets to 1.5 degrees as a temperature outcome and one that gets to a 3 degrees or greater. And then you need at least one other. And we are seeing 3 scenarios can lead people down the garden path a little bit on having a good one, a bad one, and a in between one. And no scenario should really be seen as good or bad. They should all be just seen as plausible and from as neutral in as neutral a way as possible, because they need to inform corporate decision making. So even if we all would like to be in a certain one of these scenarios, there's a real need to avoid that thinking, because it can lead to the situation where you're not actually thinking that a 1.5 degrees temperature outcome is challenging for your business, which I think is not sounding like a particularly likely situation either. So at this step, there's this exploration of the implications of temperature outcomes, and in combination with emissions pathways globally that need to be brought together, and they can then structure the different scenarios.
Jack, quick question. Is
Sure.
the 3 degrees or greater scenario any temperature higher than 3 degrees, or a range between 3 to 3.9 degrees?
Well, I think that the intent there is to explore what you consider to be extreme physical risk that remains plausible. So that means that ideally you'll be looking for existing assumption sets that can support the ultimate temperature outcome. So I think if it's 3 or if it's 3.9, obviously 3.9 will be more challenging than 3. A range, some of these higher level assumption sets tend to be presented in ranges, and then when you get under the hood, there's sort of differences at different time horizons. So as long as you're documenting your methods and assumptions, that's what's important at that end. And I think that sounds like it'll be sounds like it's fine as long as you're over the 3 degrees mark.
Excellent. Actually, we might just do one more question. From the XRB's point of view, what is the optimal scenario textbook as the ultimate point of reference for analysts to study in order to apply relevant techniques?
That's a good question. So the TCFD's guidance on scenario analysis we see as the kind of the Bible or the textbook. It's probably not quite long enough to be a textbook, but that itself draws on a whole range of different textbooks. They cite those in their guidance, so you can look at those if you like. We've got some citations. I mean, I don't think that there is an idea from our side that there's one textbook to rule them all. We're trying to, point out what is seen as a robust method that's been around for a long time, that is also recommended by the TCFD. So I don't think we're saying there's one textbook. I'd say that people are doing well if they're picking up any textbook and coming up to
Maybe
speed with
not
this
any
space.
textbook, Jack.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, back to me, Lisa.
Back to you. Yep.
Okay, so step 5, this is really important as well. This is where your inner creatives are let loose, and your sort of inner Steven Spielbergs, because this is where there needs to be narrative write-up. And so TCFD refers to these scenarios as, movies of the evolving dynamics of the future. And it's important that you do bring some creativity to this, because it's bringing risks, opportunities, potential impacts to life in a way that's actually going to engage stakeholders, particularly decision makers. And so, there's guidance about thinking about think about it in terms of a movie script. There's characters, there's big events, there's plot twists, there is action. So that is what we'd say about this step. And then this is also where quantification can come in, and we would just encourage being clear on why you're quantifying and what you're quantifying. And it doesn't necessarily have to start with trying to quantify every single part, but just some of the key ones. And um, what we recommend is using it to assess the size and magnitude of issues in the first instance around potential financial impacts for you. But there can be other types of quantification that you might think are useful as well. And, avoid this idea that you're going to be able to find all of the data that perfectly informs your scenarios, because ultimately we've got a lot of data in this world, but not all of it is able to be used for this purpose. A lot of it's backwards looking and doesn't fit in with some of the other assumptions that are coming through when we think from more of a forward-looking perspective. So it's important not to sort of convince yourself that there's not possibly enough data to do this. There just needs to be judgment and assumptions made if that's the case. So step 6, we're getting there through the Wi-Fi dramas. So this involves an important aspect which can be missed a little bit, and the word scenario analysis can sometimes not register for everybody, that there's a step of actually analyzing how your business model and strategy would perform in each scenario. So there's almost the move from creating scenarios or developing them to actually using them. And that is an important step to make sure you do well, and try to bring in your strategy and other experts to inform this. And what happens is you start to identify and work through systematically each scenario. How would our strategy perform? What might we do what could we do in each of these scenarios to have our strategy perform better? And then that can form a long list of options that you can take into later transition planning as well. Can also involve starting to develop signals so that you can, on a more ongoing basis, be monitoring, well, which scenario are we in, which decisions or key risks might be coming upon us that we want to start getting ahead of. And then, the more general sort of quality check and review aspects come in here too. So I think this is the last slide. Key messages. So this guidance is available now. Please do go and read it. Hopefully no Wi-Fi issues getting to it. Second point, climate-related scenario analysis will help improve your strategy. And I think that that's what we're hearing from those that have done this, at least those who have not approached it from a really compliance mindset and who have put the effort into do it well enough to get some insight. And that's informing their business decision making. It's really important to get that strong mandate from the highest governance level and that cross-functional team from across your entity. Otherwise, it can be tricky to do it well from there without that. Scenario analysis involves grappling with uncertainty and making judgments, and that's pretty much what the tool is specifically designed for, is issues and contexts where the entity is operating where there is uncertainty, and actually really grappling with that is important, because it means that entities can get better on top of, well, what are they certain about, what are they uncertain about, and therefore how they're going to manage that. And there is a lot of uncertainty that comes with climate change inherently. And achieving climate resilience requires a more adaptive approach or a more flexible approach to strategy. And this is there's guidance on this in the TCFD. We've elaborated on this too, but this is where there's a challenge for everybody in this space that comes with just how disruptive climate change could be, but just how uncertain we are about what that disruption will look like until it arrives. And that challenge goes right to the heart of, how do we actually do strategy? Do we just make an annual plan or meet once a year and talk about strategy and then go from there? Or do we actually have the kind of steering wheel or the ability to have some foresight and then react to things as they come in the door in an agile way? So that's a challenge for everybody. Time for some more questions, Lisa.
So currently I don't have any questions to answer. Would anyone like to pop any more questions in the Q&A? Any questions? No question's a silly question. Jack's used to me asking him questions. So I'll give you a couple of minutes if anyone thinks of anything else they'd like to ask us. But thank you, Jack. That was really informative. Well, I found it very informative. And I'm glad you came back, and apologies to everyone about our slight Wi-Fi issues there.
Was there anything, Lisa, that I should go back over, or do you think we got there in terms of covering everything?
I think you did pretty good, actually. We've got a question here. What's the level of public disclosure of the content of the essay? Well, that must be the scenario analysis.
Yeah, that's a good question. We have got more guidance on this in our guidance for all sectors in particular. I'd say that it's definitely, the disclosure is heavy on, well, have you done scenario analysis? Who was involved? What scenarios did you use, and what scenario assumptions were made in them? And there's a little bit of a break there where, if you've actually included some commercially sensitive assumptions by bringing in things like, well, how you see the markets that you're in as changing over the short term, or key movements from competitors, things like that, that you can play your judgment around not disclosing some of that from a commercial and confidence perspective, but that there is not necessarily the need, or there's not the need, to disclose in this standard the actual kind of outputs of scenario analysis, or the assessment of how resilient your strategy and business model were in each of the different scenarios. And that was a specific decision that the XRB took, elaborated on in our basis for conclusions as to why. But yeah, we were heard some feedback and were conscious of this paradox that came up earlier around everybody tending to voluntarily disclose that, yeah, our business model and strategy is totally resilient. When, if that's the case in all scenarios, then that just indicates that the entity hasn't brought itself challenging scenarios and may have failed to meet the TCFD's criteria for what is a challenging scenario. And really, if we can't develop plausible challenging scenarios that do create resilience questions for our business models and strategies, we just kind of need to keep getting better at it. So that's why there was the decision made to require less disclosure there than what we're starting to see play out globally. But we think that's going to put entities in the best position strategically, and when they start to move through to transition planning, is that they can ensure that they have challenged themselves, and then they are going to look to do something about it in transition planning, and then they're going to be able to effectively communicate that to primary users that here's what they're doing in response.
Excellent. Thank you, Jack. I've got another couple of questions here. What are your recommendations on incorporating a broader planetary crisis, for example, biodiversity crisis, into scenario analysis over and above climate change?
That's a good question. So in the method at about step 3, or maybe it's 2 and 3, there's a kind of as the driving forces start to come through, the method has usually it's called PESTLE or STEEP, and one of the E's is usually environment. So you can start to bring in environmental drivers of change, which are for you key things changing related to biodiversity or nature, then you can start to bring those in there. So that's just part of the method. I think that there is increasing interest around nature-related disclosure, and they've just come through with some guidance on scenario analysis. So I think that it's already in the method to some extent. I think that there is always the chance to improve on the quality of those driving forces and assumptions, and spend more time engaging experts around biodiversity and nature in the process, bringing them in can help with that. So yeah, that would be my answer to that. Is partly it's already in, so it should just be a quality question about how do you improve on that, and there we would expect to see kind of continued global momentum on more assumptions for that entities can use around that sort of more global picture around the biodiversity crisis. Yeah.
Okay. Just a question around confirmation of attendance. So I will follow up with our admin team, but hopefully you will get sent a thank you for attending, and will hopefully an automatic email you will receive attendance. And then we have a link to the task force on nature-related financial disclosures in the questions as well. And then can we please share the slide deck? Yes, that will be available on our website after this. And thanks, team. Great work. Well, thank you. Thanks for coming along and listening to myself and Jack. And I think that's it, Jack. I think
Great.
no more questions. Well, thank you all. And yeah, the slide pack and a recording will be available on the website in due course. Thank you very much.
Cheers,
Bye.
everybody.